We live in Bristol, which is just down the hill from Lincoln, where Zeno is. The people that founded Zeno, Vanessa and Will Halby, came in the bakery in Bristol, and we were there with our twin daughters, Hannah and Isabel. And Hannah was maybe 4 or 5 at the time. She was pretty young, and she uses a walker and had orthotics on her feet. And they introduced themselves, and they said, "Hey, we're starting this camp, or we've started this camp for people with and without disabilities. You should check it out."
Some people believe that the first conversation should be recorded because it's more raw. And I agree, there's a rawness to first conversations, but that's not all I'm looking for. Krista and I first met at Snaps in Bristol, coffee and eggs with maple syrup on the table, and we talked for a long time before setting a date to record. I believe sharing requires trust. It creates the conditions for vulnerability and for deeper understanding, and only with that can we create an honest, profound space for listening and learning from one another. My name is Léa Hirschfeld, and in this third episode of Out of Sync, Krista talks about the art of letting go. Becoming a mother of twins at 35 inevitably rocked her world, and even more so when one of them was diagnosed with cerebral palsy following a brain injury at birth. Now with the twins heading off to college and her youngest deep in adolescence, Krista reflects on what it's meant to raise children with and without disabilities, managing grief and problem solving side by side, knowing when to advocate and when to let go. The full transcript is available on our YouTube channel. Krista's daughters are in episode 1 and 2, and now it's time to grab a cup of your favorite drink and enjoy the story.
We noticed them marching with the camp in our parade on the 4th of July. And so that's always a really big event in our town with lots of floats. And the Zeno float is usually by far the best float with tons of people and great costumes and a lot of energy. And so I think we either were more tuned in to Zeno and the float after meeting Will and Vanessa, or it sort of happened around the same time.
Are you from Vermont yourself?
No, I'm from New York and my husband is from Massachusetts. So we've been living here for a little over 20 years.
What do you do?
I was a career counselor at Middlebury College for 6 or 7 years before having Hannah and Isabel, my twins. I took some time off after I had them. And now I work for a small nonprofit that supports professionals who work in career services at small liberal arts colleges. And I've been able to do that part-time from home, providing administrative support to them, which was great considering that I have 3 kids and I wanted to be home with them. So I do that part-time. And also more recently, I've started to do work as a consultant for municipalities and school districts on equity and inclusion.
Isabelle and Hannah are your first 2 kids.
Yes. Yeah.
How old were you when you had them?
34 or 35.
Had you ever been exposed to disability before?
Growing up, I don't think I was exposed to very many people with disabilities, and my school was not inclusive. I can think back and remember a couple of kids in our community that had disabilities, but they were not really integrated into my life or really into my immediate community life, at least from my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
When Hannah and Isabel, so we used fertility treatments to get pregnant with Hannah and Isabel. And because of that, we had twins. They were born 3 months premature. And they had to spend 2 months in the hospital when they were born. And it wasn't until about a month into their hospital stay that we knew that Hannah had suffered a brain injury. And when they were born, they told us that there was a chance with them being so premature that they would have a variety of issues, but that we wouldn't really know some of them until they got older. And so there were immediate concerns when they were born, just survival concerns. And then there were things that we were going to be looking out for in their development and to see how it progressed. but about a month into their birth, they do with really premature babies, they do cranial ultrasounds. And so, well, they did one right at birth and it was normal. And then they did one a month later and it showed that Hannah had some injury to her brain. It's called periventricular leukomalacia. It's a long word. It's PVL is what it's abbreviated as. And I remember that, and they were still in the intensive care at that time. And I remember the neonatologist asked to meet with us in a room and told us that this was on Hannah's brain image, and that meant she had suffered some brain damage and would have some sort of disability as a result. But we really didn't know what.
When they give you this type of information, what happens next?
Do you mean what's the sort of like
medical advice, or
Oh.
do they orient you towards doctors, or
Yeah.
do they suggest maybe like a psychologist, or somebody who can help you work through this type of
Yeah,
news that can be.
That's a really good question. I remember the immediate conversation and just being sort of in shock. And then I don't remember, I think they, in that moment, just sort of left us alone to kind of process. And we were going to the hospital every single day to be with Hannah and Isabel. And I think soon after, I don't recall initiative by the doctors particularly, but I recall that for me, and I don't know so much about for my husband, Brendan, but for me, I immediately started researching and finding out what I could and asking a lot of questions. I wanted to know what this meant. And so we pushed for a lot of information. I don't remember there being any sort of support offered from an emotional standpoint. I guess it's possible, but I was definitely very distraught and focused on trying to understand so I could solve the problem. Like I went into sort of problem solving mode.
Where did you look for this information?
The internet. And I also talked to my brother, who's a doctor. I also talked to the chief of neonatology. She wound up having a meeting with Brendan and I where she shared some brain scans of kids with similar injuries to Hannah's and shared what those kids were doing now. At that time, it was like, here's what it looked like when they were born. And at 5 years old, they're doing this. Or at 7 years old, I think which was helpful. I think she was trying to help us imagine. Her predictions were that this isn't great news, but that it's not. She tried to give it some scale. I remember her telling us about one kid in particular who she said was super smart and verbal and also used a wheelchair or something like that. So she tried to kind of give us some context, which I think was really helpful.
Do you remember how it was in your couple? Do you remember there being conversations or consequences?
It was really hard. I remember, I think we've been through phases. I remember right away feeling really alone and like we each were alone in our grief and concern and worry. When Hannah and Isabel were in the hospital, we were really focused on getting them home from the hospital. So we had this news, but then we had a whole nother month of them still being in the hospital. So we kind of mobilized around that. And then when they came home, they were still not full term. They were 35 weeks. And so we brought home twin infants. So we had a lot to occupy us then. So I think the busyness and the lack of sleep and all of that kind of focused us on that for a while. But there was a point where, as Hannah and Isabel started to get a little bit older, and we had a lot of what they call here at least in Vermont, early intervention. So if children are born that are at risk for needing extra help or are born and go to the intensive care and they're premature, There are a lot of services the state offers to parents that come to your home. So they provided a lot of physical therapy and occupational therapy and social work to help us get signed up for Medicaid, social services, all of that. So that came to the home. And during that time, since they were little babies, we were watching Hannah's development to see, was it progressing like Isabel's? Was it progressing but a little delayed, or was there something more going on? And so when we started to have those services and started to watch them more closely, and as they got older, that's when the stress really started to grow. And he was at work all day, and I was sort of watching them, hyper vigilant, watching very closely to see every little thing. What did it mean? Because nobody could really tell us, what it would mean. And that was really hard for us as a couple. I would share with Brendan all my concerns, and just, I think he had to kind of be strong for me because I was so in it every day, every minute. So that period of time where we didn't know what was going on and I was so worried about everything, I feel like he was a quiet supporter. I don't know what he would say, but I leaned on him for that.
Did you have family around who
No.
could?
Both of our families live far away. And so my mom did come up for a couple of months when they first came home from the hospital. And she came up a lot after, but she wasn't here all the time. And Brendan's mom also would come up sometimes, but we didn't really have any family support. So that was hard.
How does one find support if they need it? So would it be state support, or would it be only? I always wonder because it can be very expensive to find some help. So how does one manage that?
I feel like, at least in Vermont, it's a pretty good system, maybe because it's a small state. That early intervention program is specifically for children ages 0 to 3. I don't know how hard it is to get into that program if you aren't automatically assigned to it at birth. But because Hannah and Isabel were born so early, it was part of us being discharged from the hospital, was appointments set up with various people from that early intervention program. That was a huge resource.
And that's free.
That's free.
That's great.
Yeah. When Hannah and Isabel were around a year and a half, and Isabel took a little time to start walking and Hannah wasn't able to. And that's when we realized she probably had cerebral palsy, and they kind of officially diagnosed her, and we started figuring out what she needed to get around. It was weird because it was a common outcome of having that sort of brain injury, but I felt like a lot of the providers early on didn't want to put a label on it, and they wanted to see how she would develop, which I understand, but it felt like we were in this limbo. And maybe we would have been in limbo anyway, because kids are just developing and changing so much, and you don't really know what they're going to end up like. Mm-hmm. But I always remember thinking in those early couple of years when I was having such a hard time, I just wish I could know what 5-year-old Hannah would look like, because then I could get my head around it and be prepared for it. So those first few years of not knowing, we were giving her everything she needed and everything she would have, whether she had cerebral palsy or just a motor delay, but it didn't have a name.
And it was important for you to be able to put a name.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Why?
Maybe so I could start to accept it, that this was a disability, that this wasn't just being a preemie and something she was going to grow out of. Kind of name it to be able to become familiar with it.
Were you able to meet other parents who were going through similar paths?
Yes. And some folks I met online in parent groups. There were a couple of women whose daughters were born right around the same time with a similar premature and twins. One was a triplet and cerebral palsy. And we're still in touch, and very infrequently, but that support was, especially when they were younger, really important. Since then, I met one of those women lives in Virginia, but Hannah, we all met her and her daughter. That was great. And then more locally, we've met more people, but the local connections have been a little harder just because Vermont's so rural. So finding someone Hannah's age with a similar sort of background and disability was not as easy as finding people online.
Mhm. How did it go when they both had to go to school?
So first they went to a preschool that is also for kids who are in early intervention. It's a public preschool, and there are slots for kids who aren't in early intervention, but they hold a certain number for kids in your community that are. And so, and that preschool is free, and it's staffed with um, people who are special educators. And so that was their first school experience. And it was really good for us because I was able to be home with them. And so they didn't need to go to school because of daycare needs, job needs. And it was okay that this preschool was only, I think it was only maybe 2 days a week for a couple of hours. It was minimal.
Okay.
And all of that felt good to me because I wasn't really ready to send them off to a full day, 5 day a week experience right away.
Do you think that you were probably more worried because Hannah had difficulties?
Yes, for sure. I remember when we met with the preschool staff before they went, I was really struggling with leaving them. At that age, it's really about physically getting around and playing and accessing all of the fun things happening in the space. At home, I knew through physical and occupational therapy how to help Hannah really move around a space so that she would work her muscles and get a good workout and work her eyes and work her hands and also have access to everything. And the folks in the preschool didn't have that training or experience, which I understood, but it wasn't clear to me how they were going to get that or how they were going to provide that for her. We had to advocate for Hannah to have an individual one-on-one person to help so that she could do those things. Otherwise, I was worried she would be sort of just stuck sitting all day, not being able to do what all the other kids were going to do. And I think as Hannah grew and as we grew with her in how to help her, the way that looked different and developmentally appropriate. So when she was really little, me having her sit in my lap and helping her reach things was really appropriate. But as she got older, it was how can she do that with minimal assistance? And now it's how can she do it on her own as much as possible? And that's something that's taken us a lot of time to figure out how to do. And so then when Hannah is in a environment outside of the house, those folks know even less about how to do that well. So is a lot of letting go that you have to do as a parent to sort of hope that they'll figure it out, that they have the best interests at heart, that you're reminding them regularly what it should look like, and that eventually Hannah can advocate for that for herself.
And they're twins. So has there been a moment where you had to kind of explain or help them find the balance between their evolutions? I mean, they're the exact same age, so they're supposed to go through the same stages, with one not having as much tools to get there. How did that go for both of them?
Yeah, it's still going.
It's still going. Of course, they're teenagers. How old are they now?
17.
17.
Yeah. So again, I think it's been a real learning experience to figure out what's developmentally appropriate for them and how to find the words for them and for us, and then in the community about what's different and the same. And we're all different and we're all also the same. And I think that's kind of the framework we've started from always, like with Isabel. You know, it's hard to remember because it feels like Hannah's always had a walker, for example. But with each new tool we introduced, I'm sure we had conversations about, oh, Hannah's using this and Hannah's using that. But I think there's also some normalcy for Isabel because it just always is. It's not that different. It's different, but that's just Hannah. And so For a long time, when they were little, we talked a lot about people need different things. I wear glasses and other people have seeing eye dogs and other people use walkers, and talked about it like that. And we would be at play groups with other parents and young kids, and we'd use that same language. So we kind of think Isabel would hear us model it that way. But then there have been other times when we've been more explicit about it. I kind of feel like it might be sort of how you talk about sex with kids. Like you don't go right into all the details and the anatomy when they're 5, but you kind of work up toward as they get older. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Have they always been in the same classroom?
No.
No?
In preschool and kindergarten, they were in the same class. And then after that, we talked about it, Brendan and I, we talked about it with their teachers and we talked about it with them. And we decided to have them be in separate classes. And now they sometimes are in class together based on their schedules and what they're signed up for.
Why did you think it was better for them to not be in the same class?
We've spent a lot of time also making sure Isabel goes by they, them. So Isabel could be their own person. I think it was mainly driven by that because of a worry that Isabel would feel that they had to take care of Hannah. So, and it seemed like that's what was best practice for twins is to maybe, and it worked out. And I think we always said, if this isn't working, we can do something different.
Do you think Isabel felt that responsibility?
I think for sure, yes, and still. But we try to name that and talk about that. And even recently, Isabel and Hannah have different friend groups. And Hannah has a lot of friends all over the place and makes friends very easily, but doesn't have the one or two bestie that they are always doing things with. Isabel has 3 friends that they do everything with all the time and has a harder time making lots of friends. So sometimes Isabel, I will suggest they include Hannah, and I'll also say, is that okay? And I know that I don't want you to feel responsible all the time, but sometimes it's nice to be included. Yeah, it's easy to have a lot of guilt about all of that, but I also feel like in a way it's created some pretty great humans in Isabel and Sam because of having Hannah in their lives. So
Do you feel like school and the system in general have been encouraging, challenging, as well as doctors earlier on? Like, do you feel like she was perceived as a kid who has all kinds of potentials and all kinds of possibilities?
I think for Hannah, she just happens to be a really social, friendly, smart, happy, super verbal kid. I think that probably helps a lot. It's very easy to, I don't know what the right word is, but she just she gets you right from the start.
She's a sunshine.
She really is. And I wonder sometimes, would she have been so like that if she wasn't born with a disability? Or is that like her superpower to overcome her disability? I don't know. Or is it both? I don't know. And we live in a small community, so everybody knows who she is. Most people know who she is, just at least by sight. There are no other kids like her in our town. And she's out and about. She's very involved. So people see her on stage. They see her in chorus. They see us around town. And so in a small community, having the personality she has and being out in the world as much as she is, I think she has had people really imagine a lot for her, I guess. That doesn't mean they always know how to do it. And sometimes people are just dumb. It's not because they don't want her to succeed. I think there are probably a number of kids that have disabilities that are not visible in the way hers is. But there's maybe one other kid with a physical disability who uses a wheelchair.
Mhm.
So it's not very common. And so from her early school days, because she has a disability, she receives services, special education services, and those services include accommodations. And so there's usually a physical therapist, sometimes an occupational therapist, who will make recommendations for the physical space and other materials or tools that would be useful. And as a parent, then you have to advocate for those to be put in place. And for the American with Disabilities Act, there's some basic things that public spaces have to have. But the difference between what is legally called accessible and what's practically accessible is really big.
Could you give us an example?
Yeah. So for Hannah to get into her high school, there were not automatic doors until she got there, and we advocated for that. So someone would have to open the door for her, and that was not a requirement of the law that there be automatic doors on the building. Then she gets into the building. All the students travel through the building in one direction, and Hannah goes the other way to get onto this really old, small, slow elevator. And it only is on one side of the building. So if her class is on the other side of the building, she has a lot more travel time, and she's traveling by herself. And if there's somebody else who needs the elevator, she's waiting. So yes, there's an elevator.
Yeah.
There are classrooms that are in a separate wing that are behind incredibly heavy doors. There's no automatic door to get through. The bathroom did not have automatic doors. So these are all things that over time we've advocated for.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot better than it was. Part of the reason why I'm on our school board is because I really want those systems to be in place, and that they're not just making sure that spaces are accessible according to the law, but that they make sense. We have this beautiful new lobby that is just being completed, and there are all these beautiful new bathrooms, and they are mostly accessible, but the sink is on one side of the bathroom and the hand dryer is on the other side. And anyone can tell you that if you use a walker or a wheelchair and your hands are wet, and then you've got to put them on your walker or your wheelchair and go across to the hand dryer. So it's those sort of silly things, not silly, but there's no process for thinking about inclusion. And that goes for all people, LGBTQ folks, other kinds of disabled folks, BIPOC folks. There's no sort of overarching, like, how do we look at what we do and make sure it makes sense for all people?
How do you think that could be put into place? Would it be to have a board that includes people who have a variety of disabilities and who can actually check? Or would it be like kind of a chart?
I'm learning more about this as I think about how we can do this in our district. And some places have what's called an equity lens. And so they have, almost like you were saying, a chart. So they have, but that chart is informed by users. You create the system with those folks' voice, but then you don't have to rely on them every time you do something to tell you whether it fits or not.
So you said that you were on the school board and you're also a mother. What did you learn being on both sides?
I joined the school board because I was advocating a lot for Hannah as an individual, and I wanted to make that be more sustainable for all kids. So that was my initial desire. And I realized that systems, like a school system, is a big, slow-moving, ponderous creature. And it's really frustrating. And any activism needs people pushing from the outside and people working from within. But I think that if you have the perspective of someone who holds an identity or close to an identity that is marginalized, if you can keep the energy up to affect change from within a big, slow-moving system, it can be really long-lasting and powerful. I think I've been on the school board about 7 years now, and I feel like we're not still exactly where I want to be, but I'm hopeful that we'll get there. So it's easy to get discouraged. I mean, Hannah's even said it. Who's going to worry about these things when I'm not at the school anymore? What can we do to change it? Not just for me. One thing that we've talked a lot about, both with Hannah and Isabel, and probably with Sam, although we're not quite there yet, but, as a mom of 2 young women and who was a teenage girl myself, my goal is to get them through their teen years with some shred of self-confidence. Regardless, right? Whether you have a disability or you're non-binary or you don't like your feet or whatever. And how do you sustain your sense of self-worth even when there are things about yourself that you don't love? And, Hannah will sometimes say, like, sometimes I get mad at my body and then I feel bad. I'm like, no, you can get mad or frustrated. But she doesn't ever get stuck there. And also, you've got some pretty amazing things going on, and I think that's the kind of thing I say to Isabel, only it might just be a different thing they're frustrated and mad about. So I think that acceptance it doesn't mean you always love having a disability. You don't always love having a kid with a disability. That's been important for us. There's so many amazing people in the world that we've gotten to know, experiences we've been exposed to, perspectives that I don't know that we would have ever had if Hannah wasn't in our life. I feel really grateful for that. So.
And what about universities? Because Hannah's going to go to university.
Yep.
Hannah and Isabel are going to go to university pretty soon.
Yep.
Is the choice of the university influenced by accessibility for Hannah?
Yes, very much so.
How much?
In a big way. So for Hannah, she's a wheelchair and a walker, but the wheelchair-friendly criteria is a good benchmark for us. So we talked about, is it more important that it's wheelchair-friendly and has a really good reputation for support for wheelchair users, or a place where you really want to be and we can advocate for those things? And we all sort of decided, and I think Hannah feels pretty good about this, that she wants it to be wheelchair friendly and then a good place where she wants to be, because I think we all recognize that once she's living on her own, it's going to take that much more effort and energy.
You don't want to fight all the time.
Exactly.
It's like, okay,
yeah.
let's
we're kind of doing it here, and she has a lot of support, and we do a lot of the fighting for her.
Does it feel like a fight when you advocate for having automatic doors or having a ramp or having...
I don't know if it's a fight in the sense that folks don't want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just tiring to constantly be thinking about the things, then finding the people to do the things, and then making sure the things are done and the amount of time it takes and all of that. So it's exhausting.
We talked about Zeno when we arrived here.
Yep.
That's where we are right now.
Yep.
So you said that you discovered Zeno when Hannah and Isabel were about 4?
Yes.
So that's much too young to go to Zeno.
Yes.
Because it's for adults.
Yep.
How did you start getting involved with the community? Were you always interested in this community?
At first, I think I was not that interested because we were just focused on the day-to-day, and also because what I could see from the parade was that it was a lot of adults. Hannah's occupational therapist is one of the people that founded Zeno, and I think it was through her, but also we had started to ski as a family with Vermont Adaptive, which is at a ski mountain near here, and they have a great adaptive ski program. And Zeno does a ski camp every year. Hannah was, maybe 8 when they invited us to come over for dinner one night while they were at ski camp. Just come hang out, get to know everybody. And we thought, okay. And then they said, we'll take Hannah on the bus. We'll meet you guys there. And we were like, okay, I guess so. Are you okay with that, Hannah? And she was like, I guess so. And off she went. And so I remember showing up and everybody was in the dining hall and Hannah was already at a table and looked like she had 10 new best friends. And yep. So that was our first introduction. And then I think she went to ski camp after that, like for one day, maybe to ski with Zeno. And
do you think you were reluctant maybe at the beginning because you were also in the process of accepting this new?
It's an interesting thing to think about how, at least for us and for Hannah, it's important for her to have a disability community. And it's also important for her to be included in her day-to-day community. Yeah, trying to figure out what that looks like, and has been a kind of evolution, I think, for her and for us. And when she was that young, we weren't quite sure how she would fit in and what that would give to her or to us.
So just to give context to our listeners, Zeno is a place where people with and without disabilities meet every year, year after year, and they meet around usually artistic projects. We live together, and at the same time, we make projects that allow us to connect with the outside world. And we cook and we clean and we do all kinds of things together. So it's kind of a micro world, micro community on top of a mountain in Vermont. That's very special, and it allows very special, quickly and deeply intense relationships. How do you feel Zeno has impacted your life, yourself, your daughter's life, your family's life?
It's been huge. And it's interesting because I was thinking about this recently. As Hannah gets older, she's getting busier and busier. And I could see a time where it would be hard for her to get back for Zeno, or for Zeno for the amount of time she did before. And it makes me a little sad, but I think what an amazing launching pad it has been for her and for us as a family. And just, I think initially for Hannah to be kind of swept up with this group of folks who just showered so much love and attention on her, and for her to see other people with disabilities was pretty huge. And for us to have some respite and to know she was okay was pretty huge. To be able to feel safe enough to leave her was pretty huge. And I don't think we even knew at the time the artistic and musical component, but that's been amazing because that so aligns with Hannah and what she loves. So it's given her this chance to perform and to become so much more confident and to have some really incredible experiences and friendships that have continued outside of Zeno.
Mhm.
And so I think that there are probably a lot of camps out there for people with disabilities, but none of them quite like Zeno. There's a lot of counselors and people with disabilities, and it's a set period of time, and maybe those relationships extend a little outside. But for Zeno, it's just everybody all together, and it's a family that you see every year, and that those relationships continue. And I really think that some of the things that I've even considered doing with Hannah, I maybe wouldn't have considered if I hadn't seen Zeno do something similar. I mean, so I remember going to the Women's March in Washington, D.C. after Donald Trump's inauguration. And, we went in a van with a bunch of friends, but I brought Hannah in her manual wheelchair, and there were, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people there. It was insane and amazing. But Zeno was there with a crew of people too. We've taken Hannah canoe camping, where you load up your canoe and you paddle out to your site and you pitch your tent and you're in the middle of the woods. We've loaded her walker on the canoe and all the stuff. We make multiple trips back and forth. I feel like saying yes and then figuring it out is something that Zeno's modeled for us. I remember asking Hannah after camp, "What'd you guys do today?" And she'd say, "Oh, we sort of just hung out." And I'd be like, "Oh, that's all you did?" And then I thought, oh my gosh, that's exactly it. It's just hanging out, being with your friends, listening to music, doing art, swimming.
Mm.
I need to just take it down a notch, slowing down my pace, just chilling out a little bit and just being.
Yeah. No, it's true. And obviously when we meet, it's also vacation. So
Yes,
it's
that's
not,
true. I know.
we're
That's true.
not on
The
productive
day-to-day
mode.
life. That's true.
Which
Yep.
is great, which feels great. Well, although days are full. Like
Yes. Yeah.
when I finish the Zeno camps, I need to sleep for a week.
Yes. Yes. Hannah does too.
It is really
Yep.
intense.
Yep.
When I told you about this podcast project, did you think about things that you wanted to talk about specifically, or were there topics that you thought, oh, I'd like to put this out there?
These aren't topics, but these are a couple of random thoughts. And one is that there's so much we've gained, perspective of the world and difference and what it matters to be human, that is such a gift. Maybe we would have gotten those things without having a person with a disability in our lives, but I'm not so sure. And that something can be hard and still be amazing at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah. How does your family communicate about this subject?
We talk about it pretty freely. Yeah, it's pretty open. And even like Sam, my youngest son, who's 13, he'll sometimes come home from school and say something like, "Oh, this person said this," or "I realized that this door was not accessible," or And I think it goes hand in hand with kind of a social justice. It's an awareness we have. I think we're pretty tuned in to the world, and it's like all part of the same thing. And it's not taboo. It's pretty matter of fact.
Have you ever given advice to younger parents yourself as an
Yes.
experienced parent?
Vermont Family Network is an organization that provides a lot of support to families of children with disabilities. But one of the things they have is a parent mentor program. And I got to talk to a parent of twins, one with cerebral palsy, when Hannah and Isabel were young. And I'm now a mentor. And a couple different moms have reached out over the years for advice or just someone to listen, really. It usually ends up just being someone to listen. For you to have a person to talk to who gets it is almost the most important thing people are looking for. Sometimes I'll offer specific suggestions on how to advocate at school or with friends. Anytime you hear somebody's story, it gives you an insight into who they are and what an experience might be like, even if you haven't had that experience. And that builds empathy and understanding. So even if you're a person who's listening who doesn't have a child with a disability or isn't a person who has a disability, to hear the experience as just an honest conversation about a part of that experience, I think creates a sense of shared understanding that then people could go out into the world with, hopefully. So if they encounter people with disabilities, they might come from a place of better understanding and maybe getting perspective that they didn't have before. And I think it's pretty timely because more and more people are raising up disabled voices. There's more visibility of people with disabilities. So hearing stories to go along with that visibility, I think really helps.
Well, thank you for this conversation, Krista, for coming all the way to the top of Zeno Mountain and talking about all these things that matter to us.
You're very welcome. Thank you for asking.
You've been listening to Out of Sync, exploring life through disability, one story at a time. New episodes drop every Tuesday. Transcripts are available on YouTube and French language stories on Decali, Decales. I'm Léa Hirschfeld. Thanks for listening.